Contribution by Carley Leach. Suddenly the lights came on and the police were everywhere. They were searching for my dad. He had stabbed a man. Dad, who I comically refer to as Gaggy, is the biggest-hearted man I've ever come across, and I wanted to open with that fact because it's such a defining characteristic that my dad is best known for, believe it or not. It's worth noting here that I've never actually called him Gaggy in the presence of his cronies. It was previously something that, until now, was reserved for banter between only the two of us. Dad would stop at nothing to protect his loved ones. He's just that way inclined and always has been, but nowadays, he also realises the value in spending time with both his kids and grandkids. When a few of us have taken our little ones to meet with Dad all together, I've often stepped back and observed him soaking it up, really appreciating having so many of his family members around him. A consistent occurrence over the years has been for someone who doesn't know my dad to ask me, "So come on, Carley, what's your old man like?" And when I answer with something to the effect of a right softy with such a big heart, their reaction is always one of complete confusion because it conflicts with everything they've heard and the picture they've painted of my dad in their minds. I have a childhood friend called Jodie, not to be confused with my sister of the same name, whose dad got sent down when we were only little. My dad looked out for her and treated her as if she were his own, without ever being asked to, and in fact, I can't think of any of my friends that have gotten to know Dad and don't love him to bits. Granted, some of the lads in my circle over the years have ended up with a bit of an awkward look about them as Dad grabs them in a big man hug and gives them a kiss on the neck, but they tend to just style it out. I feel that one thing we never went without as kids was his ability and openness in fatherly love. I mostly attribute Dad's great ability in how he demonstrated his love for us, to my granddad being Dad's dad. A rare gem of a man himself, my granddad had it hard being with me nan. She was one tough cookie who didn't have a clue how to give affection of any kind. Although I will say, she did always have a beaming smile when us grandkids arrived to their house. Even at a young age, I picked up on how Nan was, and towards Dad in particular. She often said he was such a fucker, and I don't feel like she ever really bonded with my dad. How Nan was, I believe, is the very reason that my dad has been with so many women. I've had time to ponder this on and off over the years, and I've established a firm belief that if a boy experiences a lack of motherly love as he grows up, as a man, he will likely have a desire or even a need to know that he is wanted by women. And it would seem that if a boy is left longing for a mother figure into adulthood, he will continue to try to fill that void. Ultimately, what all of this deep and meaningful psychological stuff amounts to is, Dad couldn't keep it in his pants. That I'm aware of. I have 7 siblings, but I wouldn't be surprised if more cropped up at some point. My older brother, Matt, was adopted as a baby due to his mother's parents being strict Catholics, in an era when young or unmarried parents raising a child was taboo. When I was 18, Matt found us, which was a bit of a shock initially, but the most standout memory I have of that day is that it was like looking at a younger version of my dad standing on the doorstep. Matt was not only the spitting image of Dad, but he has almost all the same mannerisms too, something that is pretty striking given that he and Dad hadn't seen each other since Matt was just a few months old. Once we were all reunited, Matt moved not far from my house in Essex, and we spoke almost every day for a couple of years. But then one day, as quickly as he had appeared in our lives, he was gone again. He upped and moved away, and I haven't heard from him since, something we were all gutted about, Dad especially, as he thought he had his eldest son back for good. I don't think Matt ever got over being adopted, but I really hope he's found solace. When I was 3 years old, my mum kicked my dad out. I don't blame her at all, in fact. I'm pleased they didn't stay together, because if he had treated her the way I know he's treated other women in his life, he and I wouldn't have the friendship and bond that we do. My mum is a diamond and deserves better, something I've told Dad, and he's conceded. It was when Dad started working the doors that things really changed. Women were throwing themselves at him and he didn't have the will or strength to knock them back. He'd get home and rush to the shower to wash the scent of the women off of himself. My mum isn't stupid, she gave him chances, possibly for my sake, but she inevitably reached her limit. Mum put up with a lot of Dad's bullshit, stuff that I was too little to understand at the time, but as I look back now, I know they both truly loved each other. Dad just couldn't help himself. He simply couldn't say no to a bit of skirt, and he broke Mum's heart. I don't hold his mistakes and antics against him. It's just who he is, how he was made and raised, but I know he loved us both dearly. After the breakup, Dad used to pick me up and spend time with me, but there was one extremely memorable day when he took me to Denny's mum's house, the lovely Thelma. And on the sofa was a tiny baby. I went over and asked, "Daddy, who's this?" And he said, "This is your baby sister." I stared at this tiny baby for what seemed like ages. I remember how much I wanted to hold her, so Dad sat me down and showed me how. And that was how I met Jamie Lee for the first time. Like most little girls, other than a sports car and a unicorn, I had always wanted a baby sister, and I felt this incredible happiness that I now had one. But there was also this overpowering sense of confusion too. I was only 5 years old at this point, and I had been Dad's only child. Now we were suddenly outside of the traditional family setup. Later that day, Dad dropped me back home, and of course, whilst he was driving off down the road, probably at high speed, I was telling my mum all about the new baby that Daddy had with his new woman. Dad played a blinder there, didn't he? Mum was in shock at first, but her reaction wasn't so bad until she tucked me into bed that night and I started sobbing. "I know why Daddy's left. He has a new baby. He doesn't need me anymore." I was just feeling confused and also sad that my daddy wasn't living with me anymore. I didn't understand what that line might cause to happen next, but Mother Lion came out from within Mum, and she went crazy at me dad. My mum's a real pussycat. In fact, her nickname is Mary Poppins. But fucking heck, he had pushed things too far this time. Mum and Dad are friends, and they always have been. Aside from Dad's obvious sizable mistakes, they always had great love and respect for one another as people and as parents. Once two people have a child together, there will always be an unbreakable bond between them. Mum could have slaughtered Dad to me, made his name mud around our house and left me with a bitter taste, but she didn't do any of that. She is a much better and stronger woman than to go down that path. It's a common happening, Mum slagging Dad off to the kids because of the pain he caused her, but in the end, who are the biggest losers in that scenario? 9 times out of 10, it's the kids that end up messed up, so I'm thankful to my parents, Mum in particular, for not putting me in the centre of that game in which no one comes out a winner. There have been plenty of scary times growing up due to Dad's line of work. I remember Dad calling Mum on the house phone one day and telling her not to answer it again if it rings, and that we needed to hide in the house, stay away from the windows and wait for him to arrive. I also remember, even after they split, Dad dropping big bags of cash off for Mum to stash for him. £100,000 in used 50s seems like 10 million quid in the mind of a small child, but I knew something was up, and I never said a word to anyone about it. Anything I hadn't understood as a baby or toddler was soon to be made up for in my late teens. I knew about everything, all the women, the flings, the whole lot, as I'd become my dad's confidant in almost all matters, as Dad and I grew to become best of friends. I know some may say that a parent shouldn't be a friend to their kids, but that was our reality. Dad wasn't a conventional father. He didn't come to my sports day. He wasn't around to tuck me in at night, but we became close to each other in unconventional ways. Whatever Dad was up to, I would always look out for him and cover for him if need be. I'd be there to offer advice or provide a shoulder to cry on when things went tits up. Being Carlton Leach's daughter, I guess I grew up faster than most my age. To give an example, my 15th birthday party was held at Warehouse Club, where thugs, bouncers, gangsters, hardmen, faces, you name it, they were all walking over to wish me a happy birthday, then giving me cash. Out of respect to Dad, of course. As I left one of London's top nightclubs with my school friends and realised that I'd racked up about £1,000 in birthday money, mostly from people I'd never seen before, I was feeling pretty damned good. And my friends couldn't believe it either. Around the age of 15 and certainly by 16, I was no stranger to nightclubs at all, plus I'd seen and heard so much stuff that most adults don't experience their entire lives. I was now so far from your average teen it was hard to believe my actual age, and I fitted in with Dad and his mates in any party setting, which meant I got to enjoy the very best of the 90s club scene from a prime position that many would have given a limb for. Dad and I effortlessly bounced off of each other. We fed off of each other's energy, and being a right pair of attention seekers, we didn't care who was watching as we danced, sometimes in routine, throwing imaginary balls across the dance floor to each other and all sorts of crazy shit like that. One night, my mate Jodie and I were going to Epping Country Club for a night out, and we'd be joining Dad and his lot as well. Jodie and I managed to get hold of a couple of Jack Jills, but it didn't take long for someone to notify my dad of this, and shortly after I started to come up, I was summoned to go and see my dad, escorted there by one of his goons. I quickly stopped thinking about peace, happiness, and hugs, as I was completely bricking it, telling myself as I walked, just act normal, girl. Just be normal. All right, Dad, I said, as I tried to keep my feet still. Yeah, you're right, you having a good time, are you? He responded suspiciously. I tried to convince him that I was fine and having a nice, normal evening, but there was no fooling Dad with this stuff. He was onto me like a bloodhound. Carley, what have you taken? He asked me so sternly that any thought I'd have about lying was dead in the water, so I came clean about the pill and apologised, hoping that might be the end of it. Who did you get it from? I thought to myself. I'm not bloody telling him. The poor bloke will get a hiding, so this time I lied and said I found it in the toilets. He glared at me for what felt like 10 minutes, then finally broke the silence with, "Listen here, don't you ever take anything from anyone we don't know. It's not safe. If you want stuff, you ask one of my lot about it." As Jodie and I walked off, we looked at each other and burst out laughing. Epping Country Club, usually referred to by its regulars simply as Country Club, was becoming known far and wide. But whether it was famous or infamous shall be left down to opinion and interpretation. We had so many amazing nights at that place, too many fond and funny memories to discuss here, but trust me when I say that place could be as brutal as it could be magical. One time, I remember it being proper busy in there and we were having a wicked time. I was going for it on the dance floor when a big lump of a man approached me and explained that me dad had been taken out the back door because he needed to leave quickly, but I wasn't to panic, as someone was already on their way to pick me up and ensure I got home safe. Suddenly, the lights came on and the police were everywhere. They were searching for my dad. I was informed of an incident in the men's toilets in which Dad had stabbed a man who now wasn't in a good way. I knew Dad had it in him to be extremely violent, but I also knew that he was a fair man too, so it's highly likely that the chap had deserved it. I knew the drill. Keep your big gob shut, Carley. Head down and get out of there at the first opportunity. But the old Bill had manned all the exits. They weren't letting anyone leave without being spoken to at the front door. There was panic and hysteria throughout the place. It literally took hours to empty the club one by one, but when it was my turn to give my name, there was only one thing for it: lie through my teeth and hope. The master plan worked and we were scooped up in a car and whisked away in the midst of all the chaos. When I was out, either with or around my dad and his lot, I felt very safe and protected. I was well looked after and looked out for, but I was aware of this looming potential for it to kick off at any given moment. Dad was always surrounded by a crowd of lunatics and roid raiders, and, inevitably, there would almost always be one twat with a chip on his shoulder or something to prove. An unfortunate part of that life that led Dad to end up in more battles than he perhaps would have otherwise. So-called mates would from time to time want to see my dad fly off the handle just for drama's sake. I mean, how sad can your life be that you need to go out of your way to cause a dangerous situation just because you're bored? I went along to Sugar Hut one time with Dad. He hadn't wanted to go that particular night, but he felt he needed to show his face and make a point due to a certain situation that had occurred. One of the snides, as I like to call them, you know the type. The fake friends, hanger-ons, users. Well, one of those fuckers was in Dad's ear all night, winding him up, manufacturing a situation for their own gain. I knew it was going to go Pete Tong, and I did my best to help Dad see sense and just leave, but before I knew it, he went ape shit. He knocked a couple of people out, he smashed tables and windows. No one wanted to go near him. He was screaming, daring anyone to try to stop him, but it was only ever going to end when he decided that enough was enough. Outside the gradually emptying venue, I went mental at the people who had caused all of that unnecessary shit. Just more selfish assholes who call themselves brothers. What a load of bullshit that is. 9 out of 10 of those using that line are only around for the ride. and to see what they can get off of the back of Dad's name and reputation. Many years later, there was a similar turnout in Ibiza when Dad and I happened to be out there at the same time, and it's lucky I was. A bunch of rich, pompous pricks were trying to drag my dad into their menial bullshit whilst he was drunk and trying to have a good time. Dad was out of his tree and could barely compose himself, but certain people knew that if they said the right things, they could manipulate Dad into doing their dirty work, which, by the way, was pure egotistical nonsense anyway. I stepped in and told them all exactly what I thought of them, highlighting the fact that if this person really did consider my dad to be like a brother, he wouldn't be attempting to take advantage of him and put him in a dangerous situation over their dick measuring contest. If I had a quid for every blood-sucking, two-faced Judas motherfucker that had ever said Carlton's my brother, or similar analogy, I'd be rich. Fuck me, there has been so many of them, and I've told him this, but Dad never wants to believe it, and for some reason, he's always been so gullible in that regard. Having said that, Dad does have a small group of certain friends, no more than 5 or 6 of them, who have been wrapped around him through it all, and for all the right reasons as well, and those people are the only ones with the right to refer to my dad as their brother. For those fortunate enough to have been around Dad and on his good side will know that he's a great laugh, but he also loves a good wind-up, something I think he wishes I hadn't inherited from him. No story can explain that point better than the time Dad had an important meeting in one of the clubs he looked after, and his dearest daughter spiked his drink just half an hour before his people arrived. I sat at a distance, watching as he started to sweat. His feet were going too. The people he was sat down with didn't know I was in the club until Dad jumped up and shouted over, "You fucking spite me, ain't ya?" He sat back down, shuffling about in his chair, and says something like, "It's okay, it's just my daughter, she thinks she's funny." How I laughed! Payback for all the times the king of practical jokes had gotten one up on me. Looking back, I was a right cow at times. Marching up to bouncers and demanding to be let in was commonplace for me. Most were just trying to earn a living and probably didn't need me rocking up telling them to get my dad on the phone. But, honestly, I never meant anyone any harm, nor did I go looking for trouble, or to get my dad into shit either. But people on the club scene started to learn who my dad was, and on more than one occasion that led to them looking to fight me. I don't know why girls do it, perhaps out of jealousy, I don't know for sure. One thing I do know is that on the odd occasion trouble found me, I wasn't going to roll over. I was a live wire back then. One night, my mates had gone to the loo and I was watching the drinks on my own. 3 birds saw their opportunity and came for me. One held my arms behind me whilst another started smashing me in the face repeatedly. As she came close to me to talk bollocks, I dropped the nut on her, just like Dad had taught me to. You see, I didn't ever want to scrap. I wanted to have a good time, but if I ever had to fight to protect myself or my mates, then I did, because I was raised in such a way that you looked after yourself and your own. I also felt a protectiveness over Dad. I mean, I know in my mind it should be the other way around, and Dad has always protected me, but I really took it upon myself to look out for him. If we were clubbing or partying together, I was always on the lookout for someone who might seize an opportunity and make a move against Dad. I guess you could simply say I watched his back. Many a time I was his alibi at home, so I'd be the one that dropped him off to strip clubs with his mates, but I couldn't sleep while he was out, so I'd wait up until closing time, then go to pick him up and take him back to my house so he could sleep it off and go home the next morning. Me and boyfriends is a whole matter on its own. I mean, can you imagine being a teenage boy and having to come and meet my dad? Dad smelt their nerves from half a mile and always wound them up something chronic. If he was on the door or with his mates, they'd give any boy a right difficult time, then laugh their asses off about it. I took one boy to meet my dad once and Dad was acting strange. He rolled back a rug and started pulling up the floorboards. Then he pulled 3 guns out one by one, carefully placing each of them on the side next to him. Through gritted teeth, I said, "Dad, what the fuck are you doing of?" Another time, that same boyfriend called my dad up and asked to meet with him, which Dad agreed to straight away. "Meet me at the halfway house tonight at 7, okay?" When he pulled in, Dad was waiting for him with a bunch of his cronies, and when young Nick questioned this, Dad explained he thought there was AGG to sort out. But poor Nick had actually just gone to ask for his daughter's hand in marriage. Dad said to him, "Of course you can, you silly cunt. I love you. I'm so glad you're going to look after me daughter." So, My boyfriend who sat and watched Dad pull shooters out the floor and didn't seem too fazed is now my husband. Thank fuck Dad didn't spook him. There were a couple of boys that didn't get round my dad, however. There was one in particular who was a bit older than me, and one afternoon, Dad handed me the kid's name, address, car registration and phone number on a piece of paper and told me I'd better park the boy up within the hour or he'd do it for me. I was angry and thought that I wanted to be with this person, but I realised now why I thought I wanted to be with him so badly. He was like me dad, and I was trying to fill a father-shaped gap. Yes, I had classic daddy issues, and I know that now. Acknowledging such a problem is the first step in dealing with it and moving on with life. For the most part, I knew how to wrap my dad round my little finger. I was a cow for that. But I learnt from the best, didn't I, Daddy? And I knew what I could get away with. In terms of Dad's choice of the fairer sex, many of the women Dad has dated over the years have been decent enough, but I haven't always liked or gotten along with all of the ones Dad shacked up with. Some have been gold diggers or fame-hungry whores, but a couple of extremely strange ones had real issues with the friendship that Dad and I maintain. One nutjob, who I shan't name, told Dad that if he goes to my wedding, she'd leave him. Can you imagine? Needless to say, Dad gave me away on my big day and that loon is long gone, but there have been a couple of others since who have displayed signs of jealousy where mine and Dad's closeness is concerned. Perhaps they just don't get it. I mean, people are often frightened by what they can't understand, but it's not for me to have to try to explain to anyone how or why our relationship is what it is. I have my dad's back, and he has mine. We do our best for each other. That's all there is to it. That's family. I know there have been times when my sisters have been upset and struggled to understand why they didn't have the same type of friendship with Dad as I did, but we've all done a lot of talking as we've grown up together as sisters, and I've also explained my point of view to them, that I always longed for the idyllic family setting, living in a nice home all together with Mum, Dad and siblings, much like what they appeared to me to have, but that wasn't the hand I was dealt. Strange that my sisters were wanting to have a close friendship with Dad like I did, but I was wanting to feel like Daddy's daughter, not his best mate. I think we each realise nowadays that we all grew up in different environments, and that led to us all having differing types of relationships with our dad, but love and trust are two important consistencies throughout each. Being my dad's daughter and effectively the eldest sibling, I've always felt this pressure to be consistently strong, to protect my sisters and Carl. It's stuck with me. The memory of each time one of them realised who and what Dad was, I saw it hit them one by one like a ton of bricks. They'd sometimes look at me, wondering if I too had realised, but of course I'd been living it and keeping it from them in order to protect them for as long as possible. I was raised on films like Sopranos, The Godfather and Scarface. Joking aside, and obviously knowing they're all fictional, there are morals, lessons and happenings in those films that actually reflected my dad's reality. Me being young, impressionable, and the things I was exposed to had an effect on how my mind worked, and I was always thinking ahead and coming up with ideas and suggestions. There was a week in time when I knew there was something troubling Dad, and when he eventually explained that he had to go on a meet, but he wasn't sure if he could trust the nutcases he would be sitting down with, so I told him to tell me a bit more. Dad would be going into a restaurant in East London which was owned or controlled by the firm he was meeting. He knew he'd be searched on the way in, therefore he wouldn't have a tool to protect himself once inside. I told him not to worry, I could fix this for him. I'd just go to the restaurant a few hours before, hide his gun in the gents, pay my cheque and leave, and they say you can't learn anything from watching TV. But Dad wouldn't have it, he said it was too dangerous, but I'd decided I was going to do it anyway. However, the day before the meet, Dad told me that he'd found a solution, meaning that my plan wasn't needed in the end. Our life has been like a film at times, and it's only later in life when you sit together at home and reflect that you realise how crazy it all sounds. When it comes to Dad's actual mates, the ones that aren't blood related to him anyway, I believe he's had very few genuine friends in his life, especially in correlation to the number of people he's known and helped. I witnessed firsthand that just from a couple of phone calls, he could summon a small military-type unit, armed to the teeth and ready to take on any kind of street battle. But out of the scores of men willing to fight for and alongside my dad, there was only a handful that wouldn't try to fuck him over for a couple of quid, or would decline to make business deals behind his back. I could see that so many of them smile into his face, slapping him on the back, telling him what he wanted to hear. They were only there because Dad and his name were useful to them at that time, for whatever reason. I've always been wary of people. I trust very few, and I wish Dad had trusted fewer, to be honest, because it was very frustrating at times to see him helping someone out that I just knew, that they'd disappear once they had what they wanted. I'm pleased that in the present, he's retained a few of the friends he had back in the day, the crew that always stuck by each other, and additionally, he's perhaps got 3 or 4 newish friends around him now that have the same old school morals and would stand on if my dad needed them to, but that's it. The rest wouldn't pass a pressure test. Mark my words. When Tony died, I saw my dad plunge into a very dark place, and for a long time everything changed. It's a story people have heard all too much about, so I won't go into details, but I pleaded with Dad to get out and go straight. Just get a normal job, Dad, please. But his responses were always the same. His mind would never be changed. He was like one of the Italian mafioso, with a staunch belief that there is only one way out, and that's to be 6 feet under. He just carried on, only ever going deeper and deeper in. The hurt and pain never left him, and more friends died, as is life, but others may as well have died, due to their terrible life choices and addictions. For example, the number of people who became untrustworthy, and half the man they were previously thanks to a coke addiction, is unbelievable. That shit really is the devil's dandruff. As hard for me as it was to see the snakes and bloodsuckers crawling about around my dad over the years, I can take a positive thing from a negative, and that is to say that it taught me to see people for who and what they are, within a rather short time of meeting them. Another positivity via adversity is, I grew up longing to someday have the perfect family life, due to how my childhood had been, but of course, there is no such thing as perfect. At times, I obsessed about the house looking just right, the kids having to be exceptionally well presented, and all manner of similar things. I had to realise that obsession is not a healthy thing, and whilst doing your best is brilliant, we shouldn't be obsessively chasing perfection, although I have as close to perfect for us as can be through hard work and determination, both on my part and Nick's, to whom I'm grateful to for putting up with me and being my rock. Cliché, I know, but it's true. I learnt many harsh life lessons as a kid, and a young woman, down to who my dad was and what his life was like, but would I change him? Would I change myself or my past? No, on both counts, because it all contributed to the person I am today, and I'm lucky enough to have been blessed with wonderful children and an astounding husband, my brothers, sisters, children, husband, mum and dad. All of my family members have each played a vital role in me moving forward in life, changing, evolving, and I believe in small ways we've all helped each other. Life can be tough. There's no doubt about it. We all have to take one day at a time and do our best to be kind, love one another, and treat others how we wish to be treated. I realise that we only get one shot at life, so we should all try to do what makes us happy. Being my dad's daughter has taught me to take whatever card you get dealt and make the best of it. I love you, Gaggy.
Contribution by Jamie Lee Leach. If I could wish for anything in the world for Dad right now, it would be for him to have true happiness in a settled family home. I'm a firm believer that the past is where it is for a reason, and for the most part, that's where it should stay. We say that our past is behind us, and I feel that there's a reason why it's often difficult, in the emotional sense, to take a hard look back for most people. As is often the case for most, it's undeniable that my past has contributed to the woman that I am today and continues to help me remain driven, forward-thinking and of a positive mindset. Dwelling on the past can be detrimental to our future, but it doesn't do any harm to look back on occasion, and in that regard, I'm grateful of this opportunity to reflect on the relationship between my dad and me. As a little kid, I thought of Dad like a real-life Incredible Hulk who could and would protect us from anyone and anything. Nobody, with ill intent, was getting past our dad to get to us. That safety and security is priceless to any child, and I feel truly thankful for having that in my life, especially given that some people will never experience this feeling and may long for it until their dying day. Though he was a big, strong and tough kind of guy, Dad also had a big heart. No matter what he was going through, our dad showed us unconditional love, and the fact that he absolutely cherished us really shone through for all to see, which was reciprocated entirely by us girls. We adored him. Even before my teens, I started to pick up on elements in my life surrounding my dad that didn't seem to compare to those of my friends. Dad's lifestyle meant that our lives and family setup would always be a stark contrast to the lives of my friends. I remember thinking, I've not come across one other dad like ours. I'm not knocking my dad, we are what we are, but in all honesty, I found the situation with Dad very difficult throughout my teenage years because I adored the bones of him. And, as I said, I knew he felt exactly the same towards me, but I craved normality so badly throughout those years. I'd analyse other kids with their parents, listen to friends' stories involving their nuclear family setup, their day trips and get-togethers, and I'd secretly feel desperate for just a little bit of that. As if being a teenager isn't confusing enough, I always found myself feeling immensely guilty for having those wishes of normality, because my dad was absolutely amazing in so many other ways, and looking back now, isn't a parent's love the most important thing for a child? I think that yes, it is, although time spent together is so precious and a very close contender. As we as people grow into our own person and form individuality, we find the ability to question what normality actually is, and in the end, who decides or dictates what normal looks like. I consider us to have been very lucky as children because we didn't want for anything. First and foremost, we always had a nice home and food on the table, which I'm sad to say that all around the world this is not the case for so many families. Dad and his friends showered us in gifts, everything from designer clothing to the latest gadgets. We regularly went on amazing holidays, trips out and meals in top restaurants, plus we were lucky enough to meet certain people and go to places that most teenagers or even adults never get to. The VIP treatment and all the amazing things were lovely, but ultimately they were exactly that. Just things, and deep down, all I craved was more of Dad's time and attention. It was a little upsetting at first when Mum and Dad split up, and it also meant that Dad would be around less, but it actually provided some sense of relief because the peace and quiet that ensued was a welcome new factor in the house. And I knew that together or apart, my mum and dad would continue to love us with every fibre of their being. Had there ever been an emergency, all it would have taken was a call, and Dad would have been there for us, probably with a small army if needed. It's no secret that my dad has always been wound with the ladies, but that hasn't ever been an issue for me because I get along with virtually everyone, and so long as Dad's happy and the woman concerned is kind to me and my family, then everything's good. I kept a lot of childhood hurt and pain pent up inside and carried it with me for many years. Around 6 years or so ago, Dad and I had a real heart-to-heart conversation, and all of what I had previously felt unable to say came to the surface. I really let go. Not only did I feel liberated and free of all that I'd suppressed, but it put Dad and I in the best place we've ever been in. Since that moment, there's hardly been a day go by that I haven't called him up for a chat about virtually nothing. In fact, I call him up almost every morning, put the phone on speaker, and set the world to rights with him while I prepare the kids' breakfast. Moan, laugh, and laugh some more is the usual course of our routine calls, and I love it. I look forward to it, in fact. There is one problem, however, in that if I forget to call him, Dad calls me to moan that I didn't call him. I guess you could say that we're now making up for lost time or laughs and chats that we previously missed out on. Nowadays, Dad will give us kids any spare minute he can find, and perhaps he always wanted to, but certainly now his lifestyle allows for it. It's so lovely for me to be a part of the relationship which we have worked together to build. Not that things were ever bad between us, because they weren't. They were just different. Dad became my go-to for advice, guidance and reassurance. He will always take the time to offer a listening ear or a shoulder to cry on if I need it, and I have no problem in saying that as a 33-year-old mother of two, I still need my dad in my life. What we all went through together with Grandad was horrific. To see him the way he was towards the end was such a cruel thing for life to throw at anyone. It was painful enough to witness Grandad's deterioration, but I also found it hard, knowing what it was doing to my dad. Most things in Dad's world are within his control, but he was virtually helpless in this case, and I know that words can't really describe what Grandad meant to Dad. We all pulled together through such a difficult time, and us girls did everything we could to make Grandad happy and comfortable, both whilst he was sick and in his dying days. I hope that by us stepping up, we were also able to ease some of Dad's burden as well, because he had so much to deal with at that time. Grandad meant so much to us all. He was loved so deeply and is now missed by us all. I think Grandad's passing was a significant point in Dad's life for many reasons, not least because he took stock and considered his own role as a father and as a grandfather. If I could wish for anything in the world for Dad right now, it would be for him to have true happiness in a settled family home, not a nursing home, Dad. I think we'd all love to see our dad in that kind of environment, a place where all of his kids can visit with his grandkids, play games, have dinner together, watch silly films and laugh, just generally enjoy all that normal stuff together. The challenges we face in life, the obstacles we overcome and the difficulties which we endure all contribute to the person that each of us are today, and so we should embrace these victories rather than waste our energy on regret. Dad and I are a prime example of what I'm saying, because if things had been, let's say, more normal when I was growing up, maybe we wouldn't be as close or as strong as we are now. The value I place on time invested in another person is far greater than that I would give to material possessions, and that is something which I derive from my childhood. I think that my dad feels immensely guilty that he wasn't a conventional father, but I want him to know that it doesn't matter. I want him to just let go of that guilt and continue as we are, because things are excellent between us now, and for that I am extremely grateful. I wouldn't change my dad for the world, and I still adore him, as I always have. I will love you always, Dad.
Contribution by Jodie Leach. Dad is definitely at his happiest when he has his children and grandchildren around him. As a child and a teen, I didn't read the books or the articles, nor did I listen to rumours or hearsay about my dad. I wasn't just ignorantly refusing to hear or see what was before me, more that I was worried to learn too much, because the thought of what my dad might have been involved in scared the life out of me. The more I picked up on over time, the more it would worry the heck out of me. So I made a deliberate effort not to know about the darker side of Dad's life, plus it all had a sense of irrelevance to me anyway, because I only needed to be concerned with who my dad was to me, not so much who or what he was in the eyes of others. Now, as a mother of 2 approaching 30, none of that has changed for me at all, and whilst I'm happy to write this contribution to Dad's memoirs, it's unlikely I'll read the book, in case it keeps me up at night. I'm content with how the relationship is between Dad and I'm even happier that my kids have him as their granddad. What can be more important than that? One thing I do know, firstly, thanks to how well I know my dad, and secondly, as I've heard it on several occasions from reliable sources, is that no matter what my dad has gotten into, he has always maintained a high level of integrity. Dad is known within various circles to be fair, honest, loyal, and reliable, which is something that I am extremely proud of him for. After all, you can't say the same for many people in Dad's line of work. I have no doubt that if someone crossed Dad or our family, that he is capable of doing bad things, but he's never been nasty without good reason. Growing up, we didn't want for anything. We were so fortunate. We regularly spent weekends and school breaks at our caravan in Clacton, and some years we'd get to go abroad twice, usually to Portugal. We always had great fun when we went away as a family, and I knew that some of the kids our age had never left the county, never mind the country, so I've always been grateful for those experiences. If you know my dad, you'll know that he absolutely loves shopping. He often spoilt us anyway, but if we hadn't seen him for a week or two, he'd take us on a shopping spree, and we'd go home with more stuff than we knew what to do with. But I had something that's more important than anything you can buy from any mall in the world, and that is the love I have always felt from my parents. I was a proper daddy's girl from a very young age, and apparently I used to cling to him like a monkey. I'm not even sure why to this day, but Dad's nickname for me is Noddy. He still writes it in all my birthday cards. Dad was a proper softie who never told us off, but he did always demonstrate and tell us just how much he loved us. As a parent myself now, I know that the most important things a parent can do for their children is to ensure they're fed and that they feel safe and loved, which our dad unquestionably delivered on. There seems to be more and more broken families these days, which is truly sad for everyone involved. And when my parents split, it was no less upsetting for me, but thankfully, Dad remained very much a part of all our lives. Sure, this daddy's girl would have liked him around a whole lot more, but we were still taken good care of, and loved unconditionally by our dad, so I couldn't have asked more of him. From as early as we learned about careers at school, I realised that my dad's work wasn't exactly the stereotypical Monday to Friday job with 9 5 hours, but at that point I didn't give it too much consideration. However, as I got older, I realised on a more conscious level that Dad certainly didn't work in an office, at a factory or on a building site. I honestly didn't care what he actually did for a living though, because I had the love and attention which contributed to the childhood relationship with my father that I valued so much. After the books and films came out, more people started to ask about my dad and what he was like. But I don't think I gave them the exciting answers they were hoping for, because to me he was just my dad. Although Dad was always willing to be honest with us about who or what he was career-wise, I'm pleased that I didn't take an interest in that other side of his life, because the relationship we have now is brilliant, and of course, how things were in the past have contributed to that. I'm glad that Dad and I are as close as we are. We speak on the phone almost every day, and if he's abroad, he regularly video calls so that he doesn't miss out on seeing the grandkids, both of whom would love to see him a lot more if they could. They adore Dad, like I always did. As he was with us as little kids, Dad is extremely caring and affectionate towards my 2 children, which is probably why they cling to him in the exact same way I did decades before. We can all tell exactly how proud he is of all of his grandchildren, and it's wonderful to see. A few years ago, both of Dad's parents died within 9 months of one another, meaning we'd all lost 2 of the dearest people to us in this world. My granddad, an amazing man who had always taken care of us all, suffered badly with dementia, which is such an awful thing to see take hold of a person. We all did our best to take care of Grandad, as he once had for each of us at one time or other, which was difficult in itself, but even more difficult still was for all of us to observe that life's roles had been reversed in such a cruel fashion. As I mentioned, a matter of months after Grandad passed away, Nan did too, and I hope that they are both reunited in a better place. I know that Dad really struggled emotionally to deal with his dad's condition and death, but regardless of that, he just continued to be incredibly strong and so supportive of me and my sisters. He was always so concerned about us, how we were, and how we were coping with the situation. My dad knows, quite literally, hundreds of people from all over the UK and probably abroad as well, but whilst I obviously don't know many of them, I do realise that a lot of people over the years have been around my dad for the wrong reasons. I can't imagine living my entire life in such a way that I have to carefully consider every single friendship or relationship I have, what the reasons and motives are behind it, and if it could turn out to be dangerous for me. But that's something Dad has ended up having to live with. It's certainly not all bad on the friendship front, however, because he has got plenty of genuine people in his life, and I can think of several who have uncle status with us kids. Those people who us girls could call even if Dad wasn't around anymore, and they wouldn't hesitate to help us out. The best of it is that those diamond people who we affectionately refer to as uncle don't even need to be named or mentioned. They just know who they are, and so do we. Dad is definitely at his happiest when he has his children and grandchildren around him, that's for sure, but I understand why he needs to be in Spain for a lot of the year, and I'm grateful for the effort he makes to keep in such close contact with us all when he's not in England. If one of us has so much as a sniffle, he still checks up on us multiple times per day, and we know that if we needed him, he'd be there for us as quickly as humanly possible. Dad, we all love you for who you are to us, and nothing else matters.